Gladiators carried some of the most specialized weapons in ancient history, not battlefield gear. Arena weapons, designed for one purpose, to put on a show while trying not to die. Each fighter type had specific tools that defined how they moved, how they attacked, and how 50,000 Romans expected them to kill. Here's every weapon that saw blood on the sand. The gladius, the short stabbing sword that gave gladiators their name. 20 inches of double-edged iron, balanced for quick thrusts in tight quarters. Roman legionaries carried these weapons across 3 continents, but arena fighters learned to use them differently. No formation work, no shield wall tactics, just one-on-one angles, looking for the gap between defense and desperation. The blade stayed short for a reason. Reach didn't matter when you were already inside your opponent's guard, and in the arena, that's where every fight ended up. The gladius wasn't elegant. It was designed to punch through ribs and find organs. Efficient, brutal, final. The spatha, the longer sword that started appearing in later imperial centuries. Around 30 inches of blade, better suited for slashing than the gladius. As the empire aged, arena tastes evolved with it. Crowds had seen 1,000 gladius fights. They wanted bigger movements now, wider swings, combat that read clearly from the cheap seats at the top of the amphitheater. The spatha delivered that theatrical range. Fighters could wind up for cuts that the whole crowd could follow. It changed the pacing of matches, made them more visual, more dramatic. The sica, a curved short sword carried by Thracian-type fighters, the thraex. That inward curve wasn't decorative. A straight blade hits a shield and stops. The sica could hook around the edge and find the arm or ribs hiding behind it. Thracians fought with small square shields that left their legs exposed, so they had to end fights fast before opponents worked those angles. The sica was built for exactly that kind of aggressive, get inside and finish it fighting. Crowds loved thraex fighters partly because their weapon forced them to take risks that more defensive fighters could avoid. The pugio, the dagger, every gladiator's insurance policy. When your main weapon got knocked away, stuck in a shield, or broken against bone, the pugio came out. Some fighters wore them on the belt, others strapped them to the thigh where a desperate hand could find them during a grapple. The blade ran 8 to 11 inches. Small enough to clear a scabbard fast, long enough to reach something vital. Gladiatorial combat wasn't always standing sword work. Matches went to the ground, turned into wrestling, became ugly scrambles where the man with a blade in his hand lived and the man without one didn't. The trident, the signature weapon of the retiarius, the net fighter. 3 iron prongs mounted on a long wooden shaft, usually 6 or 7 feet. Range was the entire point. A retiarius carried no helmet and almost no armor. He survived by keeping the other fighter at distance while he worked his real weapon. The trident looked more dangerous than it actually was. It jabbed. It pinned against the sand. It kept opponents from closing. But those prongs spread the force across 3 points instead of concentrating it on one. It rarely killed outright. What it did was control space, create openings, and punish anyone who committed too hard to an attack. The net, the reet, weighted at the edges with lead balls, thrown to tangle arms, weapons, legs, vision. A retiarius without his net was already halfway dead. He had no shield, no helmet, nothing but that trident between him and a fully armored opponent. The technique was everything. Gather the mesh, swing to build momentum, release at the right distance, then follow up fast while your opponent clawed at the ropes. Ancient writers say the best net fighters practiced that throw until it became automatic. The same motion every time. They had to. Once you threw and missed, you weren't getting a second net. The fight changed completely at that moment. The spear, the hasta, carried by the hoplomachus, the heavy infantry fighter who mimicked Greek hoplite equipment. Longer than the trident, around 8 feet of ash wood tipped with iron, meant for powerful committed thrusts rather than keeping distant. The hoplomachus fought behind a small round shield with heavy bronze greaves protecting his legs. He looked like something from the old Greek wars, which was exactly the point. Romans loved exotic fighting styles, and Greek warfare had a legendary reputation. The hoplomachus always carried a gladius as backup because spears break. The arena floor was littered with snapped shafts by the end of any major games. When the hasta went, the fight became a different contest entirely. The lance, the contus, a heavier two-handed thrusting weapon that appeared in specific matchups, especially mounted exhibitions and specialized infantry bouts. No shield, both hands on the weapon, all commitment. Fighters using the contus were betting everything on landing the first solid hit before their opponent could work around the length. Miss or get deflected, and you were overextended with nothing between you and the counterstrike. High risk, high reward. The kind of gambling that made amphitheaters go quiet right before impact. The javelin. Light throwing spears used in skirmisher-style bouts and warm-up exhibitions. Some games opened with faster, lighter fighters circling each other, hurling javelins before the main duels began. Not the main event. These were appetizers, meant to get blood on the sand and build tension for the armored fights coming later. Every throw that missed ratcheted up anticipation. Every throw that connected proved the day's entertainment meant business. The scissor. One of the rarest arena weapons we have evidence for. A metal tube that fit over the forearm like a vambrace, ending in a crescent-shaped blade, half weapon, half shield. The scissor fighter could block an incoming strike with the tube and slash with that curved blade in the same motion. Only a handful of depictions and references survive. This was specialist equipment, probably limited to fighters who trained specifically for its unusual mechanics. Blocking and attacking as one movement required completely different instincts than fighting with separate sword and shield. The falx. A sickle-curved blade that overlapped with Thracian fighting traditions. Some sources show it longer than the sica, a dedicated hooking weapon meant to drag shields down or catch limbs and pull them out of position. The curve concentrated all the cutting force on a small section of edge. It didn't need much strength behind it to bite deep. Roman soldiers fighting Dacian enemies on the frontier added reinforcing bars to their helmets, specifically because the falx kept splitting them open. The arena version was probably less extreme, but the principle was the same. That curve made it nasty. The club, the fustes, more common in staged spectacles and exotic matchups than standard duels. Sometimes condemned criminals got thrown against each other with clubs instead of real weapons. It extended the entertainment, gave crowds a different kind of violence than the clean sword work of trained fighters. Raw, brutal, exhausting to watch. Men beating each other until someone stopped moving. No skill, no technique, just endurance and desperation. The games needed variety to keep seats filled across days of continuous entertainment. The whip. Occasional arena appearances, usually in theatrical context rather than real duels. You couldn't finish a fight with a whip. The damage was surface level, painful, but rarely fatal. But it worked for spectacle bouts, for beast shows where men drove animals around the sand, for punishing defeated fighters before their execution. The crack echoed in amphitheaters specifically designed to amplify every sound. Drama mattered as much as death in Roman entertainment. The torch. Fire made rare appearances in special exhibitions. Night games under artificial light. Staged naval battles where ships burned on flooded arena floors. Chaotic spectacles where firebrands added an element no blade could match. The Romans loved variety. After 50 pairs of standard gladiator matches, a fire show kept the crowd from getting bored. Entertainment was an arms race, and the games had to keep escalating. The cestus. The loaded boxing glove of ancient combat sports. Leather straps wrapped tight around the hands and wrists, sometimes studded with metal weights or sharp projections. Cestus fighters weren't technically gladiators in the strict definition. They were pugilists, boxers, part of a parallel tradition of combat entertainment. But they performed at the same games, bled on the same sand, died for the same crowds. The distinction mattered more to Roman scholars writing about proper categories than it did to the men wrapping leather around their knuckles before walking out to face someone who wanted to cave in their skull. 15 weapons. 15 ways to kill or be killed in front of an audience that had paid for the privilege of watching. Different weapons meant different fighting styles, different training regimes, different survival odds. A retiarius with his net and trident fought nothing like a thrax with his curved sica. That was exactly the point. Romans didn't want to see the same fight repeated. They wanted variety, tactical puzzles, specialists whose weapons forced them into matchups that could go either way. Every gladiator who walked onto that sand carried tools designed to entertain before they killed. The weapon came first. The death was just how the entertainment ended.